Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Welcome to Durban and to this World Economic Forum Annual Summit on Africa 2017. My name is Adrian Monck. I'm on the managing board of the forum, and it's my great pleasure to introduce this session with a man of the hour, Malusi Gigaba, Minister of Finance for South Africa. Please give him a big round of applause, big welcome. Now, you've got to do a bit of imagining in this session. You've got to imagine we're in a kind of cozy alpine fireside here, and that none of these people are really here. So it's just between the two of us. Don't worry about them and the cameras and the lights. It's a cozy fireside chat. You know, if I was in Switzerland, I'd throw in a fondue and a couple other things just to relax you. But I want to just start by asking a little bit about the man behind the office. What took you into politics? You know, I think your first given name is Knowledge. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely.
And it sounds very much from hearing about your mum and dad, your father was a pastor, your mum a nurse, that they had in mind that you become a teacher. You know, you studied education. So where did the teaching stop and the politics come in? What took you into?
Well, in a way, I also sort of evolved. Because at one stage, because my father was a pastor, I wanted to become a bishop. I imagined myself wearing those long robes, you know, carrying those pastoral sticks that bishops, Anglican bishops carry. And I evolved to wanting to become an attorney, and my father discouraged me by saying that actually you are going to have to lie on behalf of criminals. And I moved completely away from that and wanted to become an optometrist and ended up training as a teacher because I think I enjoyed it. At one stage, I was a Sunday school teacher at church. So politics, in a way, was forced on us by circumstances. The apartheid government violated us into the struggle against it. So we found ourselves getting involved at very young ages into politics, and it never stopped from there. It's about the only thing that I know since then.
And you were 3 times leader of the ANC's Youth League, weren't you, in your 20s? Quite a record. Would the young you, the 19-year-old you, go into politics in the same way today?
Many of them actually do. I think we were driven not only by an angry response to the regime, but by a commitment to serve the people of South Africa. We were informed then, as many still are now, by that burning desire to serve the people, to enforce the change. And there are many in our country, young politicians, young political activists that are involved in politics. The conditions are not the same in the sense that the environment we found when we joined politics then doesn't exist in the same way today. But there still are many young people in universities who are involved in politics and who share equally a desire to serve the country, to serve the movement, to serve our people. And I think it's something that we need to continue nurturing.
But with 56% youth unemployment, you're looking at a generation that perhaps in your generation you saw very clearly what the problem was. You know, their generation's probably looking and saying, well, maybe you're the problem. You know, your government is the problem and that we need to do something about that. Which, you know, how would you respond? How would the young you respond to the situation you see now around you?
Well, if I was young, I would say that the structure of the South African economy is creating the difficulties that young people are facing. Youth unemployment in particular was already rife around 1991, 92 when I was involved in youth politics. I remember when we established the National Youth Development Forum, I became the secretary of the provincial, the Regional Youth Development Committee in Southern Natal in Durban here. And we were confronted with this very stubborn unemployment of young people, and we struggled with a number of things. I remember back then the debates about whether we were a lost generation, how to create youth employment. We came up with proposals such as youth learnership programs, the National Youth Service Program. All of those were an attempt to respond to youth unemployment. In the mid-90s, during my presidency, I think around 1998, the ANC Youth League drafted the youth employment program, the youth employment strategy, and made a number of proposals. In that document, we argued that in the first instance, youth unemployment is a result of aggregate unemployment in the economy, the stubbornness of or the defects in the structure of the economy at the time. And we argued that in order to address it on a sustainable basis, we need to change the structure of the economy, create aggregate employment in order to get young people working, but at the same time, to come up with specific interventions.
So the ANC's always had, if you like, a gradualist approach to solving the economic challenges that South Africa faces. And you recently said in a speech just after taking office that you thought the ANC had been too conservative. Do you want to unpack that a little bit for our audience? In what way has it been too conservative, and how should it be more radical?
Well, I said that there have been those who have argued that the ANC has been conservative in approaching the economic transformation. And when you listen to the arguments about what we have done over the last 23 years and what we could have done better, my argument would be we could have better changed the structure of production in the economy to diversify the South African economy and create a thriving manufacturing sector. We have done it to some extent. Yes, we could have done more. We could have focused a lot on beneficiation, developing the skills and capabilities, particularly of young people. We could have implemented some of the programs, such as greater investments into the SME development and investing in or paying attention in changing the regulatory framework for the development of SMMEs. We have not paid sufficient attention to developing a productive economy in the townships and rural areas. Because when you look at the South African economy or the economy of our cities today, you can't look at our cities as if they are homogeneous structures. There are real problems that exist in the townships, in the rural areas, related to the absence of productive economic opportunities, that most of our townships, the economy that is there is based on like menial economic activities, plaza shops, car washes, hair salons. The townships are far away from the city centers, and the spatial problems of the apartheid system have not been addressed sufficiently. So there's quite a number of things that we could have addressed that we have not addressed sufficiently. And so you must understand the impatience for speedy change, for more significant change. And that's why the ANC around 2011 said, the president speaking in Polokwane, the January 8th statement of the African National Congress, said, we now must make a meaningful shift towards economic transformation and begin to take on board those who have remained marginalized from the economy. You can always, and we must always maintain that ability to be self-critical, because we cannot be absolutely correct in everything we do at all times. In future, we must always maintain that ability to look back in retrospect and say we could have done better.
So probably not just you saying that, it's also international investors and the international community. I mean,
Yes.
What greeted your appointment was a downgrade in South Africa's bond status. One of the things that the S&P looked at when it made that decision they looked at 5 major factors. One of the ones that was marked as strong was South Africa's institutions, its democracy. But the weakest was fiscal debt. That was the trigger for the downgrade that took place on their rankings. Now, right here, you have an opportunity to let people know what your policy will be around debt. Are you going to be borrowing to solve the problems you just outlined, or are you going to be following through on the previous ministerial trajectory of reining in spending and trying to push up revenue?
At a technical level, the budget for 2017 has been presented to Parliament and adopted, and a whole lot of processes have gone through in terms of the provincial divisions of revenue in all the provinces. Municipalities have presented their budgets. The integrated development plans have been developed, and many of them are in the process of finalization. And so pretty much the budget for 2017 is set, and nobody must tamper with that process. The MTF period, if you look at the medium-term expenditure framework, we also have outlined how we intend to manage the economy. So the issue here is that, one, we need to grow the South African economy. We need to grow it inclusively. We need to focus on growth. And that inclusive growth narrative must become part of our DNA. Because with a growing economy in an inclusive manner, we are able to address a number of challenges. One, you grow your revenue base. Two, you then have a growing fiscus with which to invest in social and economic expenditure. So it's good for us, it's good for business, it's good for society, everybody benefits from it. So we cannot spend money we don't have. We need to manage our fiscus in a prudent manner, and our spending patterns must not be out of tune with the growth in the economy. It must be aligned with the growth patterns in our economy so that we don't find ourselves wasting our resources, because right now we don't have enough fiscal options, and so we shouldn't become reckless. Even our debt ratio is high, and our surplus has gone down. The current account deficit is quite high. We need to act in a prudent and responsible manner that is going to provide that certainty to investors, to the economy, and that government is responsible in how it's managing the fiscus.
Now, there you get into some of the issues that I'm sure you spend your waking and sleeping hours worrying about, which is, that sounds very responsible and probably new music to the ears of investors and credit ratings agencies. But where does it leave those people who are saying, hang on a second, this is the year of Oliver Tambo, this is a year when we wanted to see that radical economic transformation take place, and we wanted to see some concrete steps put in place to deliver on the kind of urgent questions that South Africa is facing, those youth unemployment, those inequality issues. How do you do that? And I know you're the finance minister and not a magician, but how do you balance those two things out?
To start with, even as we embarked on fiscal consolidation, our social spending has not consolidated. We've actually invested increasingly in health, in education, in social development, in order to provide that social security net for the poor, not to sink into further poverty. We've continued to provide a social wage in terms of free basic education for the poorest in the country. We've provided increasing funding for university students in the form of the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. So we have continued to provide, to increase our social spending. And our infrastructure investments have not stopped. Against a constraining economy from 2008, we continue to invest in social and economic infrastructure. Even right now, we have about R1 trillion investment outlook for infrastructure rollout over the next 3 years, which is quite commendable. It's going to create jobs, it builds confidence in the economy, and if we implement localization programs, there's a whole range of benefits and other positive externalities that would arise from those investments. Now, going forward, we need to continue to focus on growing the economy and implementing transformation at the same time. And that's where the issue of whether you call it radical economic transformation or inclusive growth, the issue that we are addressing there is implementing structural reforms in the economy that will result, one, in changing the structure of production by industrializing the economy and creating a greater manufacturing base, but secondly, in changing the ownership patterns of the South African economy, because we cannot grow the economy on the basis of a large black community that remains without any assets, either to consume or to invest in. And so we need to create that asset base, transfer assets to the hands of the black community so that they become part of the economy.
So you go to the polls in 2 years' time. What are the goals that you're setting yourself for to meet so that voters can see some of those promises delivered on? Are there some key metrics you're looking at where you want to say we want this proportion of ownership transferred, where we want these kind of KPIs delivered on? Or is this something that as yet exists in a less formulated fashion?
Many of the targets in regard to what you are asking have already been set in terms of how does government use its 500 billion rand procurement spend in order to generate SMMEs, cooperatives, black business. We've already established a black industrialist program, and we are focusing on how to accelerate it in order to bring on board more black industrialists. Yesterday, I went to the Dubai Trade Port and saw a number of investments that include local citizens, black South Africans that have established industries at the Dubai Trade Port and are exporting to the African market. So many of those targets have already been set. We don't need to set any new, and with the target of 2019, what we need to do is to accelerate the programs that we have, implement them more efficiently. The resources are already there in the South African economy for us to achieve these goals.
So looking at South Africa in the context of some of the other BRICS, one of your fellow BRICS, Brazil, is in the grip of a huge political upheaval around corruption. How does South Africa stand in the international system on that metric?
We continue as a country both to be committed in the fight to the fight against corruption, as well as to support the institutions that have been established to fight corruption. So it is a major concern in our country too. It's a major concern in government, and so the way we implement government programs, particularly the procurement programs, is aimed at ensuring that we eliminate corruption. But the fight against corruption must at the same time not become a fight against transformation, because we must not get ourselves into a position where we use in the same sentence transformation and corruption as if bringing black people into the economy means corruption. We need to put ourselves in a position where we can achieve transformation without reducing transformation to corruption. But there are institutions in the country, the Special Investigations Unit, the Public Protector, we've got independent courts and an independent judiciary. All of those institutions are very much involved in the fight against corruption.
Sure. I mean, one of the problems Brazil had was that the length of time in office that the Workers' Party had held had, if you like, resulted in embedded practice, kind of dismantling some of those structures and bringing them into conflict with the judiciary and with the oversight issues. Is one of the problems the ANC faces its very success over the last 23 years? Has that somehow not made it, fit and dynamic and responsive? Has it embedded some issues? You heard Cyril Ramaphosa probably talk about this, talking about brown bags of money being transferred. I mean, I think people probably in the audience and beyond will want to know, who is he talking about? Who are those people? What are the accusations being made? Is that something that concerns you when you're looking to restore confidence in South Africa's economy?
We are committed. I mean, we are concerned. I mean to say, we are concerned about corruption, and we are aware that around the country, at different levels in the public and the private sector, corruption does take place, and that's why we are fighting it as hard as we have to. The challenges of incumbency for ruling parties is quite a real one. And the African National Congress is aware, fully aware, that it must continuously renew itself in order for it to continue to enjoy the confidence of the masses, because the leadership of the ANC of society was not proclaimed. It has been earned in the crucible of the struggle, and the ANC must continue to justify that confidence it enjoys from the masses of the people by running a clean government, by fighting corruption wherever its traces appear, and most importantly, by implementing transformative programs that will bring on board those that are excluded. And that's where the story of inclusive growth comes in and must become embedded in our very DNA.
And does that imply an independence on the part of the Treasury, that willing to stand up and have those tough arguments in government with other ministries who might have competing objectives, and even the Prime Minister's office?
The Treasury continues to play that role, and it has played that role, and there is no attempt nor desire to change that role. But the rest of government is concerned about corruption, and different ministries and departments are fighting corruption. I know that, for example, in some, if I may use the Department of Home Affairs, from which I come just over 30 days ago, there is a counter-corruption and security unit whose main focus is to fight corruption, and in its programs, about more than 70% of the cases that unit has dealt with involved public servants. At one stage, more than 22 immigration officers were arrested for corruption. Just over a month ago, about another 20, including the majority police officers, were arrested at the Fixburg port of entry for involvement in corruption. So there is a robust program in government to fight corruption and eliminate it within the public service. And the Competition Commission plays that role insofar as combating corruption in the private sector. And we need to continue to put our efforts together to ensure that we build that level of confidence among the public and investors, that we will not tolerate corruption both in the public as well as the private sector.
And okay, just stepping aside from the public sector and looking at the private sector slightly, what are you going to do to increase the number of black people in private sector roles? Because I look at, for example, the school you attended as a young man, and there's a couple of black faces on that school's brochure 25 years after the ANC took power. So a lot of things have not changed in this country. How are you going to implement some of those things you've been talking about without creating division and bringing people along with you?
I have been quite critical of the Black Economic Empowerment Program we've implemented over the last 23 years. It's not assisted us to create significant numbers of real and genuine entrepreneurs and industrialists. And it's largely because it was focused more on share ownership schemes. And we need to focus on the programs we're implementing now, the Black Industrialist Program, using the government's procurement spend. And so the office of the Chief Procurement Officer becomes very important in this regard, not only to ensure compliance with procurement procedures, but to also ensure compliance with government decisions with regard to empowerment of black people on the basis using the government's procurement spend. And we need to focus on state-owned companies and their procurement procedures and the extent to which, through the infrastructure rollout, we're able to localize the economy to empower black people who will become component suppliers to the state-owned companies, and implement all other programs. But it's not only the government that must implement those, it must also be the private sector. The private sector in South Africa must regard it as in their very business and commercial interests to bring on board more black participants, not at the middle or lower ranks of the middle class, but as owners of the economy, so that they create assets, they own those assets, they become significant players in how the South African economy is run.
And to do that, you need to attract investment, and you need to be able to convince investors that you can manage the process.
Absolutely, you need to do that. And we are working very hard to continue attracting investments. And I think the starting point is to implement the structural reforms in the economy, to provide certainty with regard to certain policies that remain niggling among investors, and to boost the confidence of domestic business, unlock their balance sheet so that they can invest in the economy, which will grow the confidence of international investors. We must implement the programs that we've agreed to. We've already agreed on the national minimum wage. We've already agreed that the private sector is going to provide an SME development fund. The private sector is committed to the Youth Employment Service Program, which will create capacity among young people. And we also have a number of other programs, including the private sector participation framework in the infrastructure rollout, which will, if implemented, crowd in private sector investments, increase our balance, our investment into the infrastructure rollout program, and ensure that the private sector plays a significant role in growing the economy.
So you talked a little earlier about the problems incumbent political parties have, and we've seen around the world really a huge turnover, especially in democracies of parties. The UK Labour Party, parties, I mean in France for example, you've got a middle of a presidential election where you have a young finance minister in his 40s stepping away from his traditional party, abandoning the president of whom he was a protege, and advancing forward to probably win the next stage of the French presidential election. Is that something you've paid any attention to, or you wonder might have any?
Look, the South African political system, especially that of the African National Congress, functions in a particular way. Whilst nobody can predict what's going to happen in December 2019, I think that the principle that the branches of the ANC are the final arbiters on the matter remains, and they will make their decisions in December about what shall happen in South Africa in terms of the leadership of the African National Congress.
And we've got a lot of young shapers, young global shapers here from the forum, people in their 20s. How would you encourage them to get involved in politics here in South Africa and also across the continent? What would your advice be as someone who's lived a life in politics, seen the rough and the smooth of it, and knows the kind of tough decisions and hard compromises that have to be made?
It's important for young people in Africa today to gain education. To gain education, because I think going forward, the next generation of African leaders must be very well educated, very well skilled in different fields, but also dynamic enough, because in politics you never know what job you will be assigned by either the political party or the presidents, and what will you end up doing yourself. Perhaps if you should become a prime minister or president in your country. But it's important to get involved in politics. It's important, to have an education. It's important for young people to get involved in politics while still young, and therefore to develop that experience and thick skin required in politics, to be able to know how to forge relations, how to forge developmental coalitions between different sectors, how to navigate the political space, because it's quite a different environment. But I would say that we do need as many young people in politics in Africa than ever before. The African population is overwhelmingly young and getting younger. And we need to begin to see that reflected in the political power brokers in all of our countries, because I believe that young people will have a different take on political issues than our predecessors, given our experience and dynamism.
Minister, I know everyone here is wishing you all the very best in your new role, and we look forward to hearing more from you at this meeting. So thank you for joining us, and I'm sorry I couldn't give you the fondue, but thanks for sharing your thoughts with us. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.